start with a provocative statement. There is no energy crisis. At least not in the sense of there being a shortage of energy. There's no shortage of sun or wind. What we have is a shortage of the infrastructure to harvest these things. We're shortly going to have a shortage of fossil fuels, at least some of them. None of that would matter terribly much if we weren't incredibly short of time. And even that wouldn't matter very much if we had some respectable, courageous political leadership. Two major crises of our times. Climate change needs no introduction. The other is peak oil, the notion that global oil production is going to reach its geological limits and then start to shrink as opposed to grow every year. If we want to carry on behaving in suicidal ways, we can carry on emitting too much carbon. We have to decarbonise the electricity supply apace. Then we've got to electrify the ground transport system. And then we've got to aggressively attack demand in a way that's never happened before. For my money, it means that we have to get to a totally renewable electricity supply in very short order, which means we have to build a lot of wind turbines. There's a kind of myth out there that we need to do all sorts of research to solve the problems that we've got. Absolutely, we don't. We've got all the technologies that we need at our disposal if we were only prepared to deploy them. Clearly, onshore wind is the most economic renewable that there is out there. If you're someone who says, yes, I like the idea of renewables, but I don't really want any of those around me, and actually, why don't we do tidal? Well, what you're saying is, let's not have any renewables effectively, or any more renewables for another 15 years while we get that sorted out, because these things are just in their infancy. We also need a lot of pylons, and we need to do a lot of investment in the electricity grid. We need to develop things such as the smart grid, but also the super grid, in my view. Lots of major high voltage interconnections between the countries of Europe, because that's going to help us deal with the intermittency. The other thing I think we need to do is to electrify ground transport. Why? Because all the other so-called alternatives are hopeless. Biofuels, forget it. There isn't enough land, even if you're talking about second generation. Hydrogen, a joke. It's energy wasteful diversion. So the big political questions, I think, are who's going to pay, how they're going to pay, and who's going to tell them. Because it's clearly not this government. What the government is trying to do is to privatise, if you like, the job of that bit of social policy onto the energy companies, which is a crazy thing to do because we need high energy prices. High energy prices are our friend if we want to justify and to be able to invest in all the new infrastructure that we need.
I do think climate change is the major imperative why energy is a big issue today, and is the thing that rightly is driving policy. The evidence is incontrovertible. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change uses peer-reviewed science, and its conclusions are, to all intents and purposes, that we have to act now in order to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. Now, of course, there are sceptics around and deniers, but they are very much at the fringes of the science. And the quick action is required, basically, because this is a cumulative emissions problem. What we're trying to do is reduce emissions that accumulate in the atmosphere. It's not just a case of waiting until 2049 and then suddenly, rapidly changing our energy system to hit a long-term target. But the other thing we've got to do whilst making our move towards this low-carbon economy is to deal with the issue of resilience and security. We've got to make this energy system secure at the same time, and that's very hard to do. But a couple of things about security I wanted to say. One is that I don't think security is a matter of being energy independent. Many people confuse those two things, saying as long as we generate energy ourselves within the UK, we'll be secure. But that actually doesn't look at the evidence which says that actually many of the threats to security recently have been within our own borders. Threats to gas security from poor infrastructure, threats to our power stations and lights going out from mine workers' strikes, threats to fuel distribution through truckers' strikes and so on. And security is not just about peak oil. I tend to be slightly sceptical about peak oil, some of the more overblown claims for it. It's been said that peak oil is coming for quite a long time. Pushing for renewables, for energy efficiency, for demand reduction, the energy you don't have to use is a much quicker way of getting to our targets than relying on technical fixes like nuclear power.
It's believed today that human achievements have only brought problems, that we are facing the fall of man, and that it's hubristic to aspire to anything sort of substantial, but really, instead of our achievements, which is what Marcus Aurelius said we would be remembered for, what will be on your gravestone in the future, which your kids will look at, is he minimised his carbon footprint. And that's really a fantastic thing to achieve over 70 years or 90 years. I think we see in all of this a real dumbing down of the human condition, where you're defined basically by your crap, rather than whether you're Einstein. I think what's very interesting about the footprints discussion is it's widely felt today that we have a moral vacuum, an ethical vacuum, that nobody knows exactly what is good and bad, and, you know, apart from dictators with moustaches, Adolf, Saddam, and also Griffin, he lacks the moustache, but you know where we're coming from. It's very hard to sort of know where you're headed. And what's really needed in such a situation, particularly to stabilise capitalism in a recession, is a universal moral standard. And better still, in a globalised world, one that can connect us and make us feel connected to the whole world every time. So every time I switch on my Philips fan heater, you know, I feel that sort of I am screwing up the whole planet, that there are tons of Rwandans who are going to have a flood or a drought because just I put it on the wrong setting. And that kind of makes me feel bad, but at least connected in an individualised world. You know, that I'm sort of part of a global thing here. And I want to say that because capitalism has, beyond the internet, failed to innovate very substantively in the last 20 years, getting physical things done, ladies and gentlemen, and personally moving around is harder than it was. It's more frictional, it's more tiring, and it's not much subject to innovation. So here the West's failure to innovate is naturalised as a lack of energy. You know, we're frozen in traffic jams, and so we say, look, there's not enough energy. And I think finally, there's a sense in which, like the traffic jam, society and politicians in the West are exhausted, they're depleted, they're running out, that politicians are a busted flush. And I think energy sort of functions as a scientific or technological sort of mirror image of that. When you see Gordon Brown evade another question and look with all that black stuff under his eyes, you know, it's not hard to believe also subconsciously that we're running out of energy. We have run out of political energy, but we can energise the energy debate by putting forward high-tech, high achievement, radical, risky, and may I say, research-based solutions.
Only renewables can be affordable or secure. Everything else relies on finite resources such as fossil fuels or uranium. And as we've seen with oil, those finite resources will be subject to high and volatile prices before physical exhaustion, and they will trigger conflict and even wars before they are exhausted. Fortunately, renewables are bountiful. Every hour the planet gets roughly as much solar energy as humankind uses in a year. Actually harnessing that renewable power does have other costs, financial and environmental costs, and humankind must therefore maximise energy conservation and efficiency, especially in the rich and currently very energy profligate societies like our own. Otherwise, providing for the energy needs of the poorest across the whole world would mean causing excessive environmental damage. Renewable energy is already decentralised, and harvesting it where it occurs reduces your transmission losses and has other advantages. And if you have household and community scale schemes, you can take those. Now, the economies of scale are probably more crudely efficient, but the latter holds out the prospect of energy democracy, that everyone has a role in producing energy as well as in consuming it, with the average British home potentially being a net energy exporter within the time of this century. Now, doing that would take clearly a massive initial investment. A massive initial investment to cut demand in the first place. It's an awful lot easier to export if you're using less yourself. And a massive investment in the microgeneration industry. But it's plausible. The transition is technically feasible.
For me, crystal clear as an engineer, we don't have an energy crisis, but what we probably have, what I'm sure we have, is a crisis of ambition, a crisis of trust. So for me, the whole energy discussion is less about energy itself as a technical problem, but it's a metaphor for a very problematic trend in society, that actually Western societies have lost the nerve, they've lost the trust in themselves actually to continue a very successful civilization process. Just to remember, in the last 200 years, it was possible, without a big hoo-ha, to double energy supply every 25 years. A really big success story. From my point of view, there is no material reason why we shouldn't be able to continue that path. And contradicts not only from my point of view to what we have in terms of technology, but also in terms of what we need. Everybody is crystal clear about the fact that we need a lot more energy in the coming future. Much, much, much more energy. We've got a growing world population. We've got the BRIC countries developing their living standards. People want to live, with our standards, not living in huts as they've done before. But the solution of the whole discussion today is restraint. So less consumption or attack demand. And of course, it's been portrayed as your democratic or moral duty actually to follow that. From my point of view, it's a stupid idea. It's complete nonsense. And the danger with that is that it's becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy if we don't change that outlook. Because you can't produce more energy, what we need, when you focus on restraint and limiting. There's a huge contradiction in terms. Second example I want to look into is that question about the technology. The main idea is about decentralization being the big thing. Small solutions is in renewable energies. From my point of view, the way this is being presented in these days is a strategy for complete disasters. You only need to have to look at the figures about the renewable energies. They are expensive, they are inefficient, they need to be backed up with conventional energy. It's, from my point of view, complete crap. I don't want to insult anybody. It's complete crap to put solar panels, for example, on your roofs in Britain or in Germany, and it's massively done. It's a massive waste of energy, of money, and of course of natural resources. Just one figure on that. It's estimated that the solar panels being installed in Germany, which is the #1 country on that, in 2005, it's going to cost Germany for the next 20 years 27 billion euro extra on the electricity prices. And the question is more, of course, solar energy it has a big potential and needs to be developed. It's a great thing. But why do we have that focus on such silly things like solar panels in these days in Western Europe, or the windmills? And then the calculation with windmills is not even better than with solar panels. So my answer to that is a part of the same problem. So we don't have trust in really going ahead and coming up with big solutions, trying out new universal concepts for a better and more energy supply. One example where you also could see that the approach is the big problem has been Desertec, big solar thermal plant in Africa. I'm a really big fan of that project, but it was really funny to see how all the green NGOs in Germany, because it was not the kind of project they really liked, Oh, they piled up a number of problems, dictatorships in Africa, and of course it's big business involved. It's a big thing we don't really like. It's a reactionary trend, actually. It's an attempt of a counter-revolution against the idea of big ambition, against the idea of progress and development. And finally, climate change very much fits into that idea, of course. Suddenly there is no choice allowed anymore, You are a denier if you only raise question. And why is it? Because it gives a very nice political framework to unify society through that kind of common experience of a no-going, of a suffering, of fear, of an apocalypse we have avoided. So the future being portrayed as a pure survival strategy. If we don't follow that crap, then we're going to be wiped out.
I think there's a lot of people casting sort of false dichotomies here, almost that if you worry about your carbon footprint, if you're told to save energy, somehow that's hair shirt, that's anti-progress. I would resist that completely. I think that's very important to think about your carbon footprint. There are limits on resources, the carrying capacity of the planet, climate science says so. But why should we then make that logical leap to say everything we do in the face of that is anti-progress? Why does that suddenly mean we're giving up on our notions of progress, of technological innovation and so on?
Well, I'm delighted to learn that climate science says there's something called a carrying capacity in the world. You should read some history, Jim, because you would find that the term carrying capacity comes from British imperialist anthropologists working in Kenya in the 30s, because they said black people were taking up too much natural resources. You may shake your head, but do the historical work. Climate science says nothing about the carrying capacity of the Earth. And if you maintain it does, then I can only say that you are doing something which is very contemporary today, which is entirely different from the environmental debates of the past, which is you are a denialist of history. Now, where do we hear this category denialist, which I actually am not applying to you, because it's a psychobabble category that can only date since Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence was published in 1995. Why do Greens attack their opponents, including me? I'm on a list of 640 denialists of climate science. It's quite clear that the person making that list has not read Meyer and Joe Kaplinsky's book, where we do accept that there's a problem with climate change. But we are called denialists because the contemporary atmosphere in politics and in science is trash your opponents by using psychobabble. Now the level of debate is so low and politics is so absent from the national stage that, you know, this kind of term of abuse is widely used as a way of rubbishing your opponents.
Denialists have moved, as the evidence has become more clear, from denying that it's a problem to denying that humans have caused it, to denying that we have time to deal with it, to denying that the solutions that the Greens have got will help deal with it. They're bringing their reactionary politics of centralised control over humankind into the energy arena. And that is where we've got now, is a debate between those who wish to keep control of the energy system by centralising it in nuclear and coal-fired power stations versus those who wish to democratise it. The modern environmental movement is deeply progressive. It's rooted in global development. It is informed by those in developing countries who want a better life for themselves and their children, who want to share in a planet that is survivable and hospitable and a great opportunity for all of us. And that is the environmentalism that I am proud to champion.
My main point is that it's a complete new discussion. There were, of course, controversies in the past about this or that technology, but it was embedded into a kind of consensus that actually human beings are able to provide more and better services. And we've completely lost that kind of aspiration and the trust. And the big problem is we don't have any political discussion and we don't have any party anywhere anymore who's going to defend that kind of aspirational outlook. And this is very, very nice for politicians which just say, consume less, that's great. Why is nobody talking about the big opportunities? You know, if you look at human history into a long period, you're going to find out that the rise in productivity, the rise in living standards and in culture has not been in the ice ages. I can tell you. It has been when it became warmer, and for many regions a warmer climate could have a lot of benefits.
What are the impediments to fusion? If anyone on the panel or anyone in the audience can give a coherent answer to that, I'd be very interested. It's not been the chronological successor to previous ways of generating energy, but I do think it's the logical successor, because surely replicating the sun's own mechanism for generating energy here on Earth is the most logical way to approach this problem.
I would like to talk about the people who want to solve the energy problem by increasing tax and preventing us from using energy. I'm not sure this is the solution we expect. What I would expect is experts who provide a solution to consume more energy for a cheaper price. I feel very much that the people are trying to control us. We shouldn't fly. We shouldn't, we should limit ourselves in everything, and it's really depressing.
And I think we need to, if we're going to take this seriously and practically as an issue, we need to get away from the discussion about, do you need a couple of electricians to wire in your wind turbine and your solar cells for your house, into let's have a very big investment programme to renew all the energy technology in Britain and bring it up to date, which is spending billions of pounds over lots of years. I don't get the sense that there is that vision that there was in the 1960s from the white heat of technology, which is where it was all built before.
I'd just like to ask our friend of the Earth why he automatically equates climate change and energy security with the need for decentralisation. You mentioned briefly it's about empowering the people, but I think everyone would actually agree that empowering the people would be have someone else build the plants and let us get on with our lives.
Again and again, the environmental outlook, it seems to me, is very, very suspicious of every kind of technological solution, and it seems to me that that is why there is this drive to say that it is preferable to reduce energy use, to reduce consumption, that to actually produce more is seen as a kind of last resort. And I think unless we kind of get to grips with this nervousness about technological solutions. You know, that's never going to be embraced. I think we should be enthusiastically embracing new technologies, building more energy supply, and I think if we did that, then we really would not have to worry about regulating people's lifestyles, telling them to, you know, be obsessed every time they turn the light switch off, how you're going to fly, all the rest of it, right? We don't need that.
Bottom line of all this is we haven't been paying the true cost of energy for a very long time. You know, the point's been made that we've been, you know, raising fossil fuel consumption for donkey's years, for a couple of centuries. The problem here is that the energy supply and energy consumption is vast, and a lot of people don't get their heads around the numbers. I mean, it's because energy is kind of invisible. It's vast and it's overwhelmingly supplied by fossil fuels.
With respect to technology more generally, I mean, some of these technologies are there now. I mean, Germany does get 14% of its electricity from wind power. You know, China gets a big percentage now from renewable energy. The UK lags behind on that. But the point I wanted to make is that technology doesn't get developed and deployed in isolation by sort of scientists in lab coats invent it and then suddenly go and put it up as engineers. You need prices to be right, so hence the point about higher prices. So there needs to be incentives for investors to invest in the right kind of technology. You can't just develop technology and expect people to buy it.
Well, when I said that the energy debate shows that we naturalise social problems, I didn't realise that Duncan would be talking about decentralisation as a means of providing energy democracy. That's a very interesting term, energy democracy. I wonder whether he believes in netizens, you know, where people using the net are somehow more democratic because it's all bottom up and that kind of thing. If you take the example of David, I haven't read his book, The Extinction of Petroleum Man, but I think that's a very interesting concept. Did you know that you've all, you know, been petroleum people these last 30 years, that you've been paying too little for energy and now the party's over? Now, when people talk about petroleum man or addicted to oil, you know, then I find an element of condescension there. I find an element of misanthropic feeling where you're all a bunch of idiots for having been so profligate, and you'll be a fascinating specimen for future sociologists, as Duncan says, you know, knowing what future sociologists will say. I think what's underneath all of this is a continuing view we hear that really we might need a little bit of research and development, but not much. And I think, you know, Duncan delightfully said that the governments kowtow to big science and technological solutions. Is that the case with a government that spent £6 million on carbon capture and storage research and development in the last 6 years? Is that kowtowing to technological solutions where there's one science graduate in the Labour cabinet, new Labour cabinet? And even if you take wind turbines, they're still the blades are still finished by hands. We are not automating wind turbine manufacture. So let's have centralised, mass-produced, out of Sichuan, preferably, wind turbine manufacturer where we're looking at 20 megawatts per turbine done in automated factories. Yes, yes, that will be very green, but it will be centralised.
I think this characterisation of its conservation or more energy is utter nonsense. Because yes, the planet needs more energy. Humankind needs more energy. There are people who have no access to electricity, no access to energy to power their lives above the food they eat each day. That is not acceptable in this day and age. But that is actually where we'll end up still with that. And then we'll, in the rich country, we'll have more and more energy if we go down purely this centralised path. So we need to release the renewables that are available everywhere in the planet for all the people of the planet. Part of doing that, though, and not running into climate change or other environmental problems such as a shortage of particular metals or whatever, is conservation and efficiency here in the UK, in the rich countries. But even that's not about reducing people's comfort or health or the energy services we get. None of you go home and plug your hand in a power socket to consume electricity. You have a fridge plugged in because you want a cold beer. You have a heater plugged in because you want a warm home. Those are the energy services. We can deliver those far more efficiently on far less energy, particularly if we raise the price of energy. We've got to deal with distributional problems, but raising the price, unit price of electricity and energy does not mean that your bills at the end of the quarter will be any bigger if it is used more efficiently. And the modern environmental movement is nervous about any new technology. I think you can read that into how we react. But what we're nervous about is about the control of new technology. And that's why it comes out in so many different areas, not because the technologies themselves are inherently good or bad. So I recognise that. I think we'd love to be able to supply more for everyone. But actually that's another example of the wishful thinking that a lot of people apply to climate change.
If you're interested in fusion, you have to go to the website iter.org. There's a huge reactor now being built in France, where this technology is being tested out. And there's no discussion about that, I think, which is very telling. And if you're so big fan about ITER and this attack, why does Friends of the Earth not start a campaign, to protect these kind of big projects instead of...
I'm not a fan of ITER.
You're not a fan of ITER? Okay, fine. Great.
It is a bottomless pool of money at the moment, which is starving other good technologies of
Yeah,
investment.
Of course. I'm absolutely convinced about that. On the prices, I think it's a complete rewriting of reality that we need to increase prices and put up taxes. The reason why energy has become so expensive in recent years is just because we have the wrong focus. We have the wrong focus on this renewable energy stuff. And in fact, the prices have risen dramatically. I gave you some figures about that in Germany. Solar energy has been, very much propagated in Germany as a big thing, also in terms of new workplaces. Every single workplace in Germany in the solar energy has been subsidized by the consumer through state laws. You don't have a way to opt out. 150,000 euro per year. Yeah? So you've got maybe 9,000 or 10,000 workplaces, but just count up what that means. What a lack of resource, or what a wrong focus that is. 1.5 billion euro per year the German electricity consumer has to spend extra on his bill to get solar power run. 3.5 billion euro per year you have to pay extra on your bill to get windmills run. That is a fact. I think it's a complete wrong focus. And if we meddle on with that kind of stuff, then we end up coming into this self-fulfilling prophecy that price is going to rise and that we're going to have real problems in terms of the energy supply. It's highly subsidized now already and protected, and there is no choice for you as a consumer. You have to pay that fucking money that somebody in Hamburg feels happy about putting a solar panel on his roof, That is the reality. On that stuff on the wind power in Germany, these are the dreamt up figures, 40% of energy being done by wind power.
13% of electricity.
Yeah. That is done by state protection. The state guarantees that in the electricity net in Germany is about 15 to 90% of the renewable energy. So that is not because this is a very efficient, a very modern, a very high-tech kind of stuff, because the state guarantees it that this energy is being put in. But at the same time, not a single conventional power station has been switched off for a simple reason, because you can't switch it off. Sometimes the sun is not shining, especially in Germany, and the wind is not there. So it's a complete nonsense discussion. If you don't believe me, just look at, I did a study on Greenpeace Energy, which is one of the biggest renewable energy supplier in Germany. But to their own customers, they don't sell a single kilowatt stunde, not a single piece of that electricity to their own people, because they exactly know they can't provide, constant energy to them. So what Greenpeace Energy is doing, they are buying renewable energy from, I think, 17 or 18 old water power stations in Austria. Some are built in 1949.
I just want to object, particularly to the Friends of the Earth use of our peers in the developing world to excuse policies when Friends of the Earth opposed the West African pipeline and has opposed numerous hydroelectric dams and other large projects which could have supplied people who have no access to the grid at all with what they need. And you keep denying our peers the development that we have, which means not only will they live with no light, as they do now, but they won't even be able to deal with the consequences of climate change because you're helping to deny them development.
Look, there's been an undercurrent in this debate that somehow oil and gas are going to be around for a long while, and they really aren't. It's quite true that the business of forecasting peaks is a vexed one, but there seems to be good consensus that the oil supply will be constrained from about the middle of the next decade or thereabouts. Actually, if it's 5 years either way, it doesn't make any bloody difference. The whole debate about the power generation bit of the complex is also seems to imagine that there's going to be lots of natural gas for the foreseeable future. Shell, rather quietly, has said they don't think even natural gas production will be maintainable from about the middle of the 2020s.
My final message is this undercurrent that's gone through the discussion about demand restraint's a bad thing and so on, and I think reducing demand for the reasons Duncan said is a good thing as long as we can do that at the same time as maintaining levels of energy services to people. And there are ways of doing that if you think of different ways of incentivising companies and individuals to deliver that energy. So it's not a denialist thing, denying people the right to develop, the right to do things just by saying energy demand reduction is part of the picture we have to do. We have to come up with to tackle these very real problems and these very pressing problems. And of course new sources of supply are part of it as well.
I was delighted to hear from Duncan that fusion is a bottomless pit of money. Well, actually, if you look at the ITER project, which you said was a bottomless pit of money, it's 10 billion euros. If you look at Obama's rescue program for the banks, it's okay. Look, I didn't interrupt you, so don't interrupt me, unless you want to continue with the condescension that is so natural to the green movement. I think if you look at 10 billion on ITER, and you look at Obama's program for 800 billion on the American banks, then we see the technological priorities of the Western world today. Their faith in the future, their faith in human ingenuity. They've got none.
I just want to note that Friends of the Earth International is a bottom-up federation of groups founded within the 80 member countries. It works on consensus, and its opposition to projects like that has to come from opposition within those indigenous groups. Now, I confess, those might be indigenous elites, but we are not imposing a Western viewpoint on anyone.
If you look at history, key to human progress has been historically that the drive to minimize the amount of human labor embodied in a product, in a service, or in a resource, and using a resource like energy. This has been completely turned around, and I think we have to get this focus again into the energy discussions. Otherwise, we're going to create us really big problems in the coming future.